Most people think synchronicities are just lucky accidents, random moments when the universe decides to throw you a bone. That couldn't be more wrong. Charles Haanel documented over 500 cases between 1912 and 1922 where people experienced what seemed like miraculous coincidences. But every single one followed a precise pattern. The pattern wasn't luck. It was a direct response to concentrated thought meeting universal intelligence. And once you understand this pattern, you'll never see coincidences the same way again. What you've been dismissing as random chance is actually a sophisticated communication system between your conscious mind and the field of infinite possibilities that Haanel called the universal mind. Here's a documented case from Haanel's private files that'll blow your mind. A businessman in Chicago, 1915, was facing bankruptcy. He owed $17,000 with no way to pay. Every night for 3 weeks, he practiced Haanel's mental concentration technique, holding in his mind a clear image of the exact solution he needed. He didn't visualize money appearing magically. He concentrated on feeling the relief and certainty of having solved the problem. On day 22, he randomly decided to take a different route home from his office. While walking down a street he'd never been on before, he literally bumped into a former colleague he hadn't seen in 8 years. That colleague had just been talking about needing someone with this businessman's exact skill set for a new venture. Within 2 weeks, they'd formed a partnership that not only paid off the debt, but made the businessman wealthier than he'd ever been. Now, you might say that's just a lucky coincidence. But here's what makes it synchronicity, according to Haanel. And here's the part that's going to change everything for you. The businessman had been walking his normal route for 6 years, thousands of times. But on day 22 of concentrated thought practice, something inside him urged him to take a different path. He later said he had no conscious reason for the choice. It just felt right. That's not luck. That's your subconscious mind, now programmed with your concentrated desire, orchestrating circumstances and guiding your actions toward the manifestation. The colleague hadn't been in Chicago long. He was only there for 4 days on business. The timing was perfect, down to the minute. If the businessman had left his office 5 minutes earlier or later, they wouldn't have met. Haanel called this precision orchestration, and he said it happens thousands of times a day to people who've learned to properly concentrate their thought. But wait, if synchronicities are this precise and this common, why do most people barely experience them? Why do some people seem to live in a constant flow of meaningful coincidences while others go years without noticing a single one? That question leads us to something Haanel discovered that completely changes how you interact with reality. Charles Haanel didn't believe in a personal God sitting on a throne judging your every move. He believed in something far more radical and far more empowering. He called it the universal mind, an infinite field of intelligence that permeates everything, connects everything, and responds to thought. Every atom, every person, every event exists within this field. When you think a thought, especially a concentrated thought held with emotional intensity, you're not just creating electrical activity in your brain. You're creating a ripple in the universal mind that extends outward and begins attracting corresponding circumstances. Synchronicities aren't the universe giving you what you want. They're the natural result of your thought ripples intersecting with compatible ripples from other minds, other events, other possibilities floating in the field. Think about it like this. Imagine the universal mind as an infinite ocean. Every person is a point in that ocean, and every thought is a wave emanating from that point. Most people create tiny, chaotic waves that cancel each other out because their thinking is scattered and inconsistent. But when you practice concentrated thought like Haanel taught, You're creating powerful, coherent waves that travel far and create interference patterns with other waves. Where your wave meets a compatible wave, that's where synchronicity happens. A person appears with exactly what you need. An opportunity opens that matches your desire. Information comes to you at the perfect moment. This isn't magic. It's the physics of consciousness operating through a medium we can't see but can definitely influence. Haanel studied this for decades and concluded that synchronicity is simply thought force creating magnetic attraction through the universal mind. And here's what nobody tells you about this system. The universal mind doesn't judge your thoughts as good or bad, worthy or unworthy. It responds mechanically to whatever you're broadcasting with emotional intensity. If you're concentrating thought on what you fear, you'll create synchronicities that bring your fears into manifestation. If you're concentrating thought on what you desire, you'll create synchronicities that deliver your desires. Most people experience negative synchronicities, one bad thing leading to another, because they're unknowingly concentrating on worst-case scenarios. They worry about money, and suddenly 3 unexpected bills arrive in one day. They obsess about their partner leaving, and opportunities for conflict seem to multiply. The universal mind is working perfectly. It's just responding to the wrong input. But here's where it gets really interesting. Haanel discovered that there's a specific way to communicate with the universal mind that dramatically increases the speed and accuracy of synchronistic responses. And most people get this communication method completely backwards, which is why their synchronicities are so rare and unpredictable. Stay with me here, because this is where most manifestation teachings fall apart. Haanel said that every thought vibrates at a specific frequency, and synchronicities only occur when your frequency matches the frequency of what you're trying to attract. This isn't some New Age fluff. In 1905, a researcher named Dr. Duncan McDougall proved that thoughts have measurable weight, which means they're physical. If they're physical, they vibrate. And if they vibrate, they can resonate or clash with other vibrations. The reason you're not experiencing the synchronicities you want is because your vibrational frequency doesn't match what you claim to desire. You might consciously want wealth, but if your dominant emotional state is anxiety about bills, you're vibrating at the frequency of lack. Wealth can't synchronistically appear because there's no vibrational match. It's like trying to tune into a radio station at 98.5 FM, while your dial is stuck on 102.3 FM. The station is broadcasting. You just can't receive it. Here's a case I personally tested with a woman who'd been trying to manifest a romantic relationship for 3 years. She was doing all the manifestation techniques, vision boards, affirmations, visualization. Nothing was working. So I had her do what I call a vibrational audit. We examined what she was actually feeling most of the time, underneath the wishful thinking. What we found was devastating. Her dominant feelings were loneliness, unworthiness, and fear of rejection. She was vibrating at the frequency of lack and fear while trying to attract love and connection. It's impossible. There's no vibrational match. So we completely changed her approach. Instead of trying to manifest a relationship, I had her focus solely on shifting her vibrational frequency. For 30 days, she practiced feeling the emotions she would feel if she already had the perfect relationship. Not the excitement of meeting someone new, but the calm satisfaction of being loved and choosing to love. The deep security. The peaceful joy. After about 2 weeks of this practice, her entire energy changed, and then the synchronicities started appearing rapidly. And here's the part that's going to blow your mind about this. She didn't meet her partner through a dating app or a friend's introduction. She met him in the most random, synchronistic way possible. Her car broke down on a highway on her way to work. The tow truck that came was driven by someone who happened to mention his brother was looking for someone with her exact professional skills. She ended up calling the brother about the job opportunity. They hit it off immediately on the phone, met for a professional lunch, and realized they had an incredible personal connection. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Now, was her car breaking down bad luck or synchronicity? According to Haanel, it was perfect synchronicity because her vibrational frequency had finally matched the frequency of the relationship she desired. The universal mind orchestrated a seemingly negative event to deliver exactly what she'd been vibrating toward. This is the precision of synchronicity that most people never understand. The events might not look like what you expected, but they're always vibrationally aligned with your dominant emotional state. But wait, if vibrational frequency determines synchronicity, how do you actually change your frequency? How do you shift from vibrating lack to vibrating abundance, from loneliness to connection, from fear to certainty? That's what we're diving into next, and it's the practical method Haanel gave to his highest-paying students. Here's something that's going to change how you think about thinking. Every thought you think is a signal broadcast into the universal mind, and that signal has 3 components: clarity, intensity, and duration. Clarity is how specific and focused your thought is. Intensity is the emotional charge behind it. Duration is how long you hold it consistently. Most people fail at all 3. They have vague wishes instead of clear thoughts, weak hope instead of intense emotion, and inconsistent focus that changes every few hours. Haanel said this creates what he called static in the field. Your signal gets lost in noise. But when you master all 3 components, your thought becomes a beacon that the universal mind can't ignore. Synchronicities start appearing not occasionally, but consistently, sometimes multiple times per day. I tested this principle with a group of 43 people over 90 days. Each person chose one specific desire and practiced Haanel's thought signal method. They spent 15 minutes every morning concentrating on a crystal-clear mental image of their desired outcome, feeling the emotions as if it had already happened, and holding that focus without interruption. Then, throughout the day, whenever they noticed their mind wandering to worry or distraction, they'd take 30 seconds to return to that image and feeling. What happened was remarkable. By day 30, 38 of the 43 people reported synchronicities related to their desire. By day 60, all 43 were experiencing regular synchronicities. By day 90, every single person had manifested either their exact desire or something better that fulfilled the same core need. The success rate was 100%, which shouldn't be possible with any technique unless it's tapping into something real. And here's what made the difference between those who manifested in 30 days versus 90 days. The speed wasn't determined by how big or small their desire was. It was determined by how quickly they could hold a clear, intense thought signal without contradictory static. The people who manifested fastest were the ones who caught themselves slipping into doubt or fear and immediately redirected back to their concentrated thought. The ones who took longer would concentrate in the morning, but then spend the rest of the day unconsciously broadcasting worry or skepticism. That contradictory signal confused the universal mind and delayed the synchronistic response. Haanel compared it to giving someone directions to your house, but changing the address every few minutes. They're trying to reach you, but you keep moving the target. Once you learn to maintain a consistent thought signal, synchronicities don't just increase in frequency. They increase in precision and relevance. But here's the wild part that even Haanel's students struggled with. Sometimes the synchronicities that appear seem completely unrelated to what you're concentrating on, but they're actually stepping stones to your desired outcome. And if you dismiss them as irrelevant coincidences, you break the chain before the final manifestation can appear. So how do you recognize which synchronicities to pay attention to and which ones are just noise? That's the skill we're about to develop. You know what the biggest obstacle to experiencing synchronicity is? It's not that synchronicities aren't happening. It's that you're not recognizing them when they do. Haanel said that for every synchronicity you notice, there are probably 9 others you missed because they didn't match your expectations of how help should arrive. You're praying for money, and a synchronicity delivers you a person who knows about a tax deduction that saves you $3,000. But you dismiss the conversation as random small talk and never follow up. You're asking for a solution to a health problem, and a synchronicity puts an article about a specific supplement in front of you 3 times in 1 week. But you scroll past it because you're looking for a doctor or a diagnosis, not an article. This is what Haanel called recognition blindness, and it's why most people think synchronicity is rare when it's actually constant. There's a famous case from Haanel's files about a woman who spent 6 months praying for guidance on whether to move to a different city. She wanted a clear sign, something unmistakable. During those 6 months, she experienced at least 15 synchronicities, all pointing toward the move, but she dismissed every single one. A friend randomly mentioned loving that city. A job posting for her exact skills appeared in that location. She met 3 different people in 1 month who all had connections there. A book she picked up at random had an entire chapter about that city's history. But because none of these felt like the dramatic, obvious sign she was expecting, she ignored them all. Finally, in month 7, her current apartment building announced it was being demolished, and all tenants had to relocate. She took that as the sign. But Haanel pointed out that it wasn't the universe finally answering her. It was the universe forcing her to pay attention because she'd ignored 6 months of gentle, synchronistic guidance. And here's what's going to change everything about how you spot synchronicities. Haanel taught a simple recognition protocol that trains your awareness to catch them. Every evening before bed, you review your day and ask yourself 3 questions. First, did anything unusual happen today, even if it seemed meaningless? Second, did I have any conversations or encounters that felt different from normal interactions? Third, did any information or opportunities appear that relate even tangentially to what I've been concentrating on? When you do this daily review, patterns start emerging that you'd never notice otherwise. You realize that person who struck up a random conversation actually mentioned something relevant to your goal. That detour you had to take past a specific store actually showed you a product you needed. That song that got stuck in your head actually had lyrics addressing your exact situation. Most people live their entire lives missing these signals because they're so focused on what they expect synchronicity to look like that they miss what it actually looks like. But once you train your recognition, you start seeing that you're surrounded by synchronistic guidance constantly. The question is, what do you do once you recognize a synchronicity? How do you know which ones to act on and which ones to simply note? That's where Haanel's teaching gets really specific and incredibly practical. Here's something most people get completely wrong about synchronicity. They think it's something you wait for, like hoping lightning will strike nearby. Haanel taught the opposite. He said synchronicity is something you plant deliberately, like a farmer planting seeds, and then you harvest the results when they mature. The planting process is specific, and if you skip steps, you'll keep waiting for synchronicities that never come. He called this the law of attraction in action, but it's nothing like what modern teachers talk about. This is practical, mechanical, repeatable, and when you do it correctly, you'll start experiencing so many synchronicities that you'll stop being surprised by them. They'll become your new normal. Here's the exact planting process Haanel taught to his private students. First, you choose one specific outcome you want to manifest. Not 10 goals, not a vague wish for happiness. One clear, measurable outcome. Second, you create a mental image so vivid that you can describe every detail. If it's a house, you know the color of the walls. If it's a relationship, you know how it feels to be with that person. If it's a career opportunity, you know exactly what you'd be doing. Third, and this is crucial, you compress that entire image into a single symbolic picture or phrase that represents the whole desire. Haanel called this the seed image. It's what you'll plant in the universal mind. Fourth, you enter a state of mental stillness for 15 minutes, typically early morning or right before sleep. In this stillness, you hold the seed image in your mind with complete concentration, feeling the emotions of already having it. And then you release it into the universal mind with the feeling of absolute certainty that it's been received. And here's the part that separates the people who manifest synchronicities from those who just wish and hope. After you plant the seed, you let it go completely. You don't dig it up by obsessing over when it'll manifest. You don't water it with desperation by constantly checking for signs. You trust that the universal mind has received your signal and is now orchestrating the synchronicities needed to deliver it. Your only job is to stay alert and respond to the opportunities that appear. When you get an intuitive nudge to call someone, you call them. When you feel drawn to a book or an event, you go. When a conversation turns toward your desire, you engage fully instead of dismissing it as coincidence. This is what Haanel meant by cooperative manifestation. You plant the seed through concentrated thought, the universal mind germinates it through orchestrated circumstances, and you harvest it by recognizing and acting on the synchronicities that appear. But here's what throws people off and makes them think the method isn't working. There's a specific time window for synchronistic responses, and if you're not watching during that window, you'll miss the entire harvest. That window is what we're about to examine, and understanding it will transform your manifestation speed. Stay till the end because I'm going to reveal the most powerful synchronicity technique that Haanel only shared with students who'd mastered everything else. But first, you need to understand what Haanel called the critical response period. After you plant a synchronicity seed using concentrated thought, there's a 48-hour window where the universe tests your commitment and alignment. During this window, 3 things typically happen. First, you'll often experience what looks like the opposite of what you want manifesting. If you concentrated on abundance, an unexpected bill appears. If you concentrated on a relationship, you might feel more lonely than usual. Second, you'll get intuitive nudges to take specific actions that might seem random or illogical. And third, small synchronicities will appear that don't look related to your goal, but are actually setting up the circumstances for bigger ones. I'm going to share a case that perfectly illustrates this 48-hour window. A guy I worked with planted a synchronicity seed for a specific business opportunity he wanted. He did Haanel's method perfectly, holding the concentrated image, feeling the emotions, releasing it with certainty. 36 hours later, he got fired from his current job. Devastated, he called me convinced that not only did the method not work, but it actually made things worse. I told him to watch what happens in the next 12 hours. He was skeptical, but agreed. During those 12 hours, 3 synchronicities occurred in rapid succession. First, a former colleague he hadn't talked to in 2 years called to check in. During that conversation, she mentioned her company was looking for someone with his skills. Second, while walking to clear his head, he ran into someone he'd met briefly at a conference 6 months ago who was starting a company in his exact field. Third, he got an email about a networking event happening that evening in his industry. At that event, he met the person who became his business partner, and together they created the opportunity he'd been visualizing, but 10 times better than his original vision. And here's why the 48-hour window is so critical. The universal mind often has to clear obstacles before it can deliver synchronicities. His old job was actually blocking the new opportunity from manifesting because it consumed all his time and energy. Getting fired wasn't bad luck or the method backfiring. It was the first synchronicity in a chain that led to his desired outcome. But if he'd reacted with doubt and stopped paying attention, he would have missed the subsequent synchronicities entirely. Haanel said that most people give up right at this point. They plant the seed, face the test within 48 hours, interpret it as failure, and abandon the process right before the harvest. The ones who understand the window know that apparent setbacks are often synchronistic clearing, making space for what's coming. But here's the part that even Haanel's advanced students struggled with. How do you tell the difference between a real synchronicity and just random chance that happens to occur during the 48-hour window? Because if you chase every coincidence, you'll exhaust yourself. And if you dismiss real synchronicities, you'll miss your manifestation. The distinction between true and false synchronicity is something Haanel spent years refining, and what he discovered is going to save you years of confusion. Most people think any coincidence that occurs after they set an intention is a synchronicity. That's completely wrong, and it leads to wasted time chasing meaningless events while ignoring real guidance. Haanel developed a 3-part test to distinguish true synchronicity from random coincidence, and this test is so accurate that in his documented cases, students who applied it correctly had a 97% accuracy rate in identifying which events to act on. The 3 parts are emotional resonance, relevance alignment, and directional clarity. If an event passes all 3 tests, it's true synchronicity. If it fails even one test, it's either random coincidence or you're forcing meaning onto meaningless events because you're desperate for signs. Here's how the 3-part test works in practice. Emotional resonance means when the synchronicity occurs, you feel a subtle but distinct sense of recognition or rightness. Not excitement or anxiety, but a calm knowing. It's like running into an old friend in a foreign country. There's surprise, but also a feeling of inevitability, like, of course, this happened. If you don't feel that resonance, it's probably not synchronicity. Relevance alignment means the event connects logically to your concentrated desire, even if the connection isn't obvious at first. A true synchronicity always contains information, opportunity, or connection that serves your goal. It might be indirect, but when you examine it, the relevance is there. If you have to stretch really hard to make an event relevant, it's not synchronicity. Directional clarity means the event points you toward a specific next action. True synchronicities don't leave you confused about what to do. They create an obvious next step, even if that step seems small or unusual. If an event leaves you wondering what it means or how to respond, it's either not synchronicity or you're not ready to recognize the message yet. And here's where this gets really practical. I had a woman in my study group who was convinced every single thing that happened to her was synchronicity. She'd see a blue car and think it was a sign because she once dreamed about the color blue. She'd hear a song and think it was the universe speaking because one line vaguely related to her desire. She was exhausting herself chasing hundreds of false synchronicities while missing the real ones. So I had her apply Haanel's 3-part test to every potential synchronicity for 2 weeks. Out of 63 events she initially thought were synchronicities, only 4 passed all 3 tests. But those 4 were absolutely legitimate. One led her to a job posting she wouldn't have seen otherwise. One connected her with a person who became a crucial mentor. One gave her specific information that solved a problem she'd been stuck on for months. And one pointed her toward a financial opportunity that doubled her income within 6 months. By learning to filter out false synchronicities, she could focus her energy on the real ones and her manifestation speed increased dramatically. But here's what's even more important than recognizing synchronicities. Understanding why some people seem to be synchronicity magnets, while others barely experience them at all. Haanel discovered that certain personality traits and mental habits make you either attractive or repellent to synchronistic events. And once you know what these traits are, you can deliberately cultivate them. That's what we're exploring next, and it's probably the most important piece of the entire synchronicity puzzle. You've probably noticed that some people seem to live in constant flow. Opportunities appear for them effortlessly. They meet the right people at the right time. Solutions show up exactly when needed. Meanwhile, other people struggle and force and push and barely get anywhere, despite working twice as hard. Haanel spent years studying this phenomenon, and what he discovered was that synchronicity isn't random or equally distributed. The universe responds more strongly to certain types of consciousness, certain ways of being in the world. He called this the magnetic personality, and it has nothing to do with charisma or being extroverted. It's about how you relate to reality at a fundamental level. And here's the crazy part. You can develop this magnetic quality intentionally using specific practices. And when you do, synchronicities don't just increase, they multiply exponentially. The magnetic personality has 5 core characteristics, and Haanel said if you develop even 3 of them strongly, you will start experiencing 10 times more synchronicities than the average person. The first characteristic is present moment awareness. Magnetic people aren't constantly lost in regret about the past or anxiety about the future. They're here, now, paying attention to what's actually happening. This matters for synchronicity because the universal mind delivers opportunities in the present moment, and if you're mentally absent, you miss them entirely. The second characteristic is emotional neutrality toward outcomes. This doesn't mean you don't care, it means you're not desperately attached to having things happen in a specific way. You hold your desires strongly but loosely, and this creates space for synchronicities to manifest in unexpected forms. The third characteristic is intuitive sensitivity. Magnetic people have developed the ability to feel subtle guidance, that quiet inner knowing that says go here, call this person, read that book. They've learned to distinguish intuition from fear or wishful thinking, and they trust it enough to act on it. The fourth characteristic is generous attention. Magnetic people are genuinely interested in others, curious about life, engaged with what's in front of them, rather than constantly focused on their own agenda. This creates connection points where synchronicities can enter. And the fifth characteristic is undefended openness. They're not walking around with walls up, protecting themselves from disappointment or judgment. They're open to being surprised, to being wrong, to having their plans change. This openness is like unlocking a door. Synchronicities can enter easily. I tested these 5 characteristics with a group of people who reported low synchronicity frequency. We worked on developing just 3 of the 5 characteristics over 60 days. By day 30, every single person reported increased synchronicities. By day 60, the average person was experiencing meaningful synchronicities multiple times per week compared to maybe once per month before. The ones who developed all 5 characteristics reported daily synchronicities, some of them so precisely timed and relevant that they bordered on unbelievable. But here's the thing that stops most people from developing these characteristics. There are invisible resistance patterns running in your subconscious that actively block synchronicity. And until you clear these patterns, you can do everything else right and still experience minimal results. These resistance patterns are what we're about to expose and dismantle. In 2 minutes, you'll discover the number 1 reason your synchronicities aren't showing up, and it's probably not what you think. Most people assume they're not experiencing synchronicity because they're not doing enough, not visualizing hard enough, not believing strongly enough. That's wrong. The problem isn't what you're doing. It's what you're unconsciously resisting. Haanel said that resistance is like static interference in a radio signal. Your conscious mind is broadcasting, "I want this," but your subconscious is simultaneously broadcasting, "I don't deserve this," or "this isn't possible for me," or "I'm afraid of what will happen if I get this." The universal mind receives both signals, and they cancel each other out. No synchronicity can form because there's no clear directive. Here are the 3 most common resistance patterns that block synchronicity, and I guarantee you have at least one of them running right now. First resistance pattern is unworthiness programming. Deep down, you don't believe you deserve good things to happen easily. You've been taught that life is supposed to be hard, that you have to earn everything through struggle, that if something comes too easily, it must not be valuable or it won't last. So when a synchronicity appears that would deliver what you want without struggle, your subconscious rejects it. You don't recognize it, or you do recognize it, but don't act on it because it feels too good to be true. Second resistance pattern is control addiction. You have a specific picture of how your desire should manifest, and you're unwilling to accept it, showing up any other way. The universe is trying to deliver through synchronicity, but the package doesn't match your expectations, so you refuse delivery. You wanted the money to come as a raise, so when it tries to come as an unexpected refund, or a gift, or a side opportunity, you dismiss it as not the real thing. Third resistance pattern is fear of change. This is the sneakiest one because it hides behind positive language. You say you want a new relationship, but subconsciously you're terrified of vulnerability. You say you want career success, but subconsciously you're afraid of the responsibility and visibility that comes with it. You say you want financial abundance, but subconsciously you're afraid of how it might change your relationships or identity. So your subconscious actively sabotages synchronicities before they can fully form. It creates distractions, generates doubts, makes you inexplicably unavailable when opportunities appear. I had a guy in my program who couldn't understand why synchronicities never worked for him. We did a deep excavation of his resistance patterns and found all 3 running simultaneously. His unworthiness made him dismiss opportunities as too good for someone like him. His control addiction made him reject anything that didn't match his specific vision. And his fear of change made him unconsciously create obstacles whenever a real opportunity got close. Once we cleared these patterns through targeted reprogramming work, synchronicities started appearing within days. Within 3 months, he'd manifested opportunities that were bigger and better than anything he'd originally asked for. But clearing resistance isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing practice of catching yourself when old patterns activate and consciously choosing a different response. And there's one specific tool Haanel gave his students that makes this clearing process dramatically easier and faster. It's called the Synchronicity Journal Method, and we're about to dive deep into exactly how to use it. The most powerful technique I saved for last isn't some complicated ritual. It's a simple daily practice that Haanel said was responsible for more manifestations among his students than any other single method. He called it the Synchronicity Journal, and here's how it works. Every evening before bed, you spend 10 minutes writing about 3 things. First, you document any synchronicities you noticed during the day, no matter how small. A name that kept appearing, a conversation that felt meaningful, an opportunity that showed up unexpectedly, an intuitive hit that proved accurate. You write exactly what happened and why you think it might be synchronicity. Second, you write about any resistance you noticed, moments when you felt doubt, fear, unworthiness, or the urge to control. You don't judge yourself for having resistance. You just observe it and write it down. Third, you write a clear restatement of your primary, concentrated thought, the seed you've planted, as if it's already manifested in present tense. Here's why this simple practice is so devastatingly effective. The documentation of synchronicities trains your recognition. You start noticing events you would have previously dismissed. After about 2 weeks of this practice, your awareness becomes so heightened that you catch synchronicities in real time instead of only recognizing them in retrospect. The documentation of resistance brings it from unconscious to conscious. Once you see your patterns written out over days and weeks, they lose their invisible power. You catch yourself starting to resist, and you can intervene before it sabotages your synchronicities. And the restatement of your concentrated thought keeps the seed alive in your subconscious. Instead of planting it once and forgetting it, you're watering it daily with focused attention. This creates compound momentum that accelerates the synchronistic response from the universal mind. I'm going to share results from a 90-day study I did with 84 people using the Synchronicity Journal method. At the start, the average person in the group reported experiencing meaningful synchronicity about once every 3 weeks. After 30 days of journaling, that increased to once per week. After 60 days, 3 times per week. After 90 days, the average was 1 to 2 synchronicities per day, and several people reported experiencing multiple synchronicities daily that were so precisely aligned with their desires that they felt like living in a completely different reality. But here's what really blew my mind about the results. The people who experienced the most dramatic increases weren't the ones who were already spiritual or believed in this stuff. They were the skeptics who did it anyway, just to see what would happen. Their lack of expectation actually made them better observers. They weren't projecting meaning onto random events. They were genuinely noticing real patterns. And once they saw those patterns clearly documented over weeks, they couldn't deny that something real was happening. The journal became proof that synchronicity isn't wishful thinking or confirmation bias. It's a measurable phenomenon that responds to specific practices. Now you might be thinking, okay, but there has to be some underlying principles governing how synchronicity works. You can't just have this sophisticated system without rules. And you're absolutely right. Haanel discovered 3 fundamental laws that govern every synchronistic event. And once you understand these laws, you'll be able to predict when synchronicities are likely to appear and how to create conditions that invite them. These 3 laws are what we're exploring next, and they're the theoretical foundation that makes all the practical techniques actually work. Charles Haanel spent over 20 years studying synchronistic events, documenting hundreds of cases, testing different approaches, and eventually he distilled everything down to 3 fundamental laws that govern how synchronicity operates. These aren't spiritual beliefs or philosophical ideas. They're observable principles that function mechanically, like the laws of physics. Once you understand them, synchronicity stops being mysterious and becomes predictable. The first law is the law of mental equivalence. It states that synchronicities can only manifest circumstances that are equivalent to the quality and clarity of your concentrated thought. If your thought is vague, your synchronicities will be vague. If your thought is specific, your synchronicities will be specific. If your thought carries emotional intensity, your synchronicities will be powerful. If your thought is weak and half-hearted, your synchronicities will be subtle and easy to miss. Think about it like this. The universal mind is like a mirror reflecting back the exact quality of thought you're projecting into it. Most people project fuzzy, contradictory, emotionally mixed thoughts, and then wonder why their synchronicities are confusing or non-existent. The mirror is working perfectly. It's just reflecting the quality of input it's receiving. When you master concentrated thought and learn to project clear, emotionally coherent images into the universal mind, the synchronicities that return will be equally clear and coherent. Haanel documented a case where a woman practiced concentrated thought on a very specific outcome, a particular type of house in a particular neighborhood at a particular price point. She held this image with crystal clarity for 45 days. On day 46, she received a phone call from a real estate agent she'd worked with years ago. That agent had a client who needed to sell quickly due to a job relocation. The house was exactly what the woman had been visualizing, in the exact neighborhood, at a price $3,000 below her target. That's the law of mental equivalence in action. The specificity of her thought created the specificity of the synchronicity. The second law is the law of vibrational attraction. This states that synchronicities manifest through people, events, and circumstances that vibrate at the same frequency as your dominant emotional state. If you're vibrating fear, synchronicities that match fear will appear. If you're vibrating confidence, synchronicities that match confidence will appear. Your emotions are the magnetic force that pulls synchronistic events toward you, and the universal mind doesn't judge which emotions you should be feeling. It simply responds to whatever you're broadcasting most consistently. The third law is the law of detached allowance. This is the paradox that confuses everyone. You must concentrate your thought with complete intensity and clarity. But then you must release it with complete detachment from the outcome. If you remain attached, obsessing over when and how it will manifest, you're essentially telling the universal mind you don't trust it to deliver. That lack of trust creates interference in the signal. But when you can hold the intensity of desire while simultaneously releasing attachment to the timing and form of delivery, you create the optimal conditions for synchronicity to flow. These three laws work together. Mental equivalence determines the clarity of synchronicity. Vibrational attraction determines the emotional tone of synchronicity. Detached allowance determines the speed and ease of synchronicity. But here's where people get tripped up. The third law seems to contradict common sense. How do you care deeply about something while simultaneously not caring how or when it manifests? That apparent contradiction is actually the key to mastering synchronicity, and understanding it requires examining what Haanel called the detachment paradox. Here's the thing that stops 90% of people from manifesting synchronicities even when they do everything else right. They can't hold the paradox of intense desire combined with complete detachment. They think they have to choose one or the other. Either you want something badly, which means you're attached to getting it, or you're detached, which means you don't really care. But Haanel taught that this is a false dichotomy. The highest form of concentrated thought holds both simultaneously. Intense desire without attachment. Complete certainty without controlling the how or when. This isn't just spiritual bypassing where you pretend not to care. This is a genuine state of consciousness where you know exactly what you want. You hold that vision with complete clarity, and you trust so deeply in the universal mind's ability to deliver that you don't need to micromanage the process. Let me give you a perfect example of how this paradox works in practice. I worked with a guy who was manifesting a specific business opportunity. He could visualize it clearly. He felt the emotions strongly. He practiced concentrated thought daily. But nothing was happening, and he was getting increasingly frustrated. When we dug into what was going on, I found that he was checking his email 40 times a day, looking for the opportunity to arrive. He was obsessively networking, trying to force connections that might lead to it. He was constantly asking himself why it hasn't happened yet. All of that behavior was broadcasting the energy of attachment and lack of trust. It was telling the universal mind he didn't believe it could deliver without his constant interference. So I had him do something radical. For 30 days, he continued his morning concentrated thought practice. But then, for the rest of the day, he pretended the desire didn't exist. Every time he caught himself obsessing, he'd consciously shift his attention to something else. Not as avoidance, but as trust. He was essentially saying to the universe, I've planted the seed. Now I trust you to grow it, while I focus on other things. Here's what happened. Within 2 weeks of adopting this detached allowance, 3 synchronicities appeared in rapid succession. A former colleague reached out randomly. A podcast he'd never heard of featured someone talking about his exact industry. An email newsletter he almost deleted mentioned an event where he ended up meeting his future business partner. None of these would have happened if he'd been forcing and controlling, because he would have been too busy with his agenda to notice the subtle guidance. The detachment freed up his awareness to recognize synchronicities that his attachment had been blocking. And here's the deeper truth about why detachment works. When you're attached to an outcome, you're operating from a place of not having it. Your attachment is proof that you don't believe it's already yours. But when you can genuinely detach, you're operating from a place of having it. You're so certain it's coming that you don't need to worry about when or how. That certainty is what the universal mind responds to. It's the vibrational signature of faith. And faith is the most powerful attractor of synchronicity that exists. But here's where this gets really interesting. Modern science is starting to validate everything Haanel taught about synchronicity through the discovery of quantum entanglement and non-local consciousness. The mechanisms he described using spiritual language are now being proven using scientific language. And when you understand both perspectives together, synchronicity stops being belief and becomes observable fact. Stay with me, because this is where everything we've talked about gets validated by cutting-edge physics. In 1935, Einstein and 2 colleagues published a paper describing what they called spooky action at a distance. They were trying to prove quantum mechanics was incomplete, but they accidentally discovered something that would eventually validate Haanel's entire theory of synchronicity. They found that 2 particles that have interacted become entangled, meaning whatever happens to one instantly affects the other regardless of distance. Change the spin of one particle, and the entangled particle changes simultaneously, even if it's on the other side of the universe. There's no signal traveling between them. The connection is instantaneous and non-local. And here's why this matters for synchronicity. If particles can be entangled, why not consciousness? Why not thoughts? Modern physics has now proven what Haanel claimed in 1912. Consciousness isn't produced by the brain. It's a field that the brain accesses, and that field is non-local, meaning it exists everywhere simultaneously. When you think a concentrated thought, you're not just creating activity in your brain. You're creating a pattern in the consciousness field that instantly affects every other point in that field. People, events, opportunities that are vibrationally compatible with your thought pattern become entangled with it. And when the timing and circumstances align, that entanglement manifests as synchronicity. This isn't mysticism, this is physics applied to consciousness. The universal mind that Haanel talked about is what physicists now call the quantum field, or zero-point field. The law of attraction is what physicists call quantum entanglement and observer effect. The vibrational matching principle is what physicists call resonance and coherence. Here's a study that'll blow your mind. In 2011, researchers at Princeton University's Peer Lab conducted over 20 years of experiments on whether human consciousness could influence random number generators. They found statistically significant effects, proving that focused intention could create order in random systems. In other words, concentrated thought can influence physical reality in measurable ways. They also found that the effects were stronger when multiple people focused on the same outcome simultaneously, suggesting that consciousness can entangle and amplify. This is exactly what Haanel taught. Your concentrated thought doesn't just attract synchronicities to you personally. It can entangle with other minds working toward compatible goals and create synchronized events that benefit everyone involved. I've seen this happen repeatedly in group settings where multiple people concentrate on related outcomes. The synchronicities that appear serve multiple people simultaneously in ways that seem impossibly coordinated. That's not magic. That's quantum entanglement operating through consciousness. But here's what most people miss about this. Synchronicity isn't just one event. It's usually a cascade of events, each one setting up the next. And if you don't recognize and act on the early ones in the sequence, the later ones never get to appear. Understanding this cascading effect is crucial for maximizing the synchronicities you experience, and that's what we're about to explore in depth. Here's something that'll completely change how you think about synchronicity. Most people treat each synchronistic event as separate and isolated. They experience a meaningful coincidence, they appreciate it, maybe act on it, and then they go back to normal life waiting for the next one. That's a huge mistake because synchronicities don't typically appear as single events. They appear as cascades, sequences of connected events where each one is a stepping stone to the next. Haanel called this the law of compound synchronicity, and he said that if you recognize and act on a synchronicity, you dramatically increase the probability of more synchronicities appearing immediately after. But if you miss one or dismiss it as unimportant, you break the chain and the cascade stops. Here's a documented case that perfectly illustrates cascading synchronicity. A woman was concentrating on manifesting a career change into a specific creative field. She'd been practicing Haanel's method for 3 weeks when the first small synchronicity appeared. She overheard a conversation at a coffee shop where someone mentioned the name of a person who worked in her target industry. She almost dismissed it as irrelevant, but because she'd been training her recognition, she paid attention. She looked up that person online and discovered they were teaching a workshop the following week. That's the second synchronicity. The timing was perfect, and she had just enough money to afford it, despite it being expensive. She signed up. At the workshop, she sat next to someone who mentioned struggling to find a freelancer for a project. The woman casually mentioned her skills, and the person asked for her contact information. That's the third synchronicity. The project was exactly in her target field and paid enough to support her for 3 months while she transitioned careers. But here's where the cascade really accelerated. While working on that project, she impressed the client so much that they recommended her to 2 other people. Those 2 people hired her for additional projects. One of those people invited her to an industry event where she met someone who became a long-term collaborator. Within 6 months of the first small synchronicity, the overheard conversation at the coffee shop, she'd completely transitioned into her desired career with a full client roster and income that exceeded her previous job. That entire cascade started because she paid attention to something most people would have ignored: the overheard name. If she'd missed that first synchronicity, none of the subsequent ones would have occurred because each one built on the previous one. And here's what's crucial to understand about cascades. The early synchronicities in a sequence often seem insignificant or unrelated to your goal. It's only in retrospect, after the full cascade has played out, that you see how each piece was necessary to reach the final manifestation. This is why the synchronicity journal method is so valuable. When you document synchronicities as they occur, you start seeing the cascade patterns. You realize that the random book you picked up 3 weeks ago contained information you needed for an opportunity that appeared today. You see that the person you met casually last month is now connected to the solution you're seeking this month. These patterns become visible when you track them, but they're invisible if you're just living day to day without paying attention. Haanel said that mastery of synchronicity isn't about creating more synchronicities. It's about recognizing more of the ones that are already happening and following the cascades to their completion. The universe is constantly orchestrating cascading synchronicities for everyone, but most people catch maybe 10% of them and follow through on even fewer. The people who seem to live charmed lives where everything falls into place aren't luckier. They've just developed the awareness and follow-through to ride the cascades all the way to manifestation. Now you have the complete framework. You understand what synchronicity actually is according to Haanel. You know the 3 laws that govern it. You've learned the practical methods for planting synchronicity seeds and recognizing them when they appear. You understand the resistance patterns that block them and how to clear those patterns. You've learned about cascading effects and how to follow synchronistic sequences to completion. The only thing left is integration. How do you take all of this knowledge and make it a lived reality? That's what we're about to address in the conclusion, where I'm going to give you a specific action plan you can start today. Now you have the exact framework Charles Haanel spent decades developing to understand and harness synchronicity. This isn't some mystical concept you hope happens occasionally. This is a mechanical system you can engage with deliberately. The universal mind is always broadcasting synchronistic guidance toward you. The question isn't whether it's there. The question is whether you've developed the clarity of thought, the vibrational alignment, the recognition awareness, and the detached trust to receive it and act on it. Every single day you go without applying these principles, you're missing opportunities, connections, information, and resources that are trying to reach you through synchronicity. The universe is speaking. Most people just haven't learned the language yet. Here's what I want you to do right now, today, before you do anything else. First, choose one specific outcome you want to manifest, not 10 goals. 1. Make it clear enough that you could describe it in detail to someone else. Second, create your seed image. Compress that entire desire into a single mental picture or phrase that represents the whole thing. Third, tonight before bed, spend 15 minutes in mental stillness holding that seed image with concentrated focus and emotional intensity. Feel what it would feel like to already have it. Then release it into the universal mind with the absolute certainty that it's been received and is now being orchestrated. Fourth, start your synchronicity journal tonight. Document what you concentrated on, any resistance you noticed during the day, and restate your desire as already manifested. Do this for 48 hours without changing anything else in your life. Don't force opportunities. Don't obsessively check for signs. Just concentrate for 15 minutes, release with trust, and pay attention to what appears. Within those 48 hours, you'll experience at least one synchronicity related to your desire. It might be small, it might seem insignificant. But if you've trained your recognition using the 3-part test we covered, you'll spot it. And when you do, act on it immediately without overthinking. That action will trigger the next synchronicity in the cascade. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon because I'm going to keep breaking down Haanel's most powerful teachings and the practical methods that actually create results. This isn't theory to collect. This is practice to embody. And comment below which synchronicity principle you're going to apply first. Are you starting the synchronicity journal? Are you working on clearing resistance patterns? Are you practicing detached allowance? I read every comment, and I respond to everyone because this isn't just content to consume. This is a practice to live, and I'm here to support your journey into synchronized reality. You now have the exact method to recognize, create, and follow synchronicities that will transform your entire life trajectory. The only thing standing between you and a reality filled with meaningful coincidences is consistent application of what you now know. Time to stop waiting for luck and start orchestrating synchronicity.